to see if it works. So anticipation, I'd like to see you introducing these things into your animations, into your shots. So I'll be looking for the application of these things. Now, straight ahead versus pose-to-pose action. This is sort of an old-fashioned, well, it is an old-fashioned term, where a straight ahead or a pose-to-pose action would be where you've got the star animator or the illustrator coming in and drawing the key poses of the character. So if it's Mickey Mouse, you know, his extreme pose, if he's walking, you know, he's like this, and then he goes to his next one, you might draw that one, but all the in-between frames, some lowly animator is going to come in and animate, right, and draw all the in-betweens. A pose-to-pose or a straight-ahead animation, the old version is when they would draw every single frame as a keyframe. Here's, I think this should be. So here's from. We've got the dwarves dancing. They are pose-to-pose animated. So they're keyframes, and then somebody's coming in and drawing the in-betweens. Then when you see Snow White come in and she's dancing, that's straight-ahead animation where they they filmed somebody dancing and then just traced each one. So you'll see the real quality difference. So you can see the kind of quality difference between it's not as cartoony looking because it's actually something. It's an actor who's exaggerating something, but it's not the same as. So how does that apply to what we're doing? Well, okay, here we can see. So hers is straight ahead and they're close to pose. So you can see in the way the fabric moves, especially this one. Anyway, so how is that different, or how does that apply to what we're doing? Well, most of what you're doing is pose-to-pose animation. You saw when you're doing the bouncing ball, you're setting the extreme points and then letting Maya, who's your underpaid animator, come in and fill in the gaps through interpolation. But in Maya, we also do straight-ahead animation when you do dynamic systems. Now, Maya is kind of doing all the work, but each frame is being considered on its own. When you're using a particle system or something, you get realism like you can with this type of animation with Snow White, but you lose a lot of control. So the animators couldn't really easily change what was going on here because they're just tracing. Okay, so we looked at slow in, slow out, the ease in and ease out. There are a couple of different concepts here. There's secondary animation, and then there's also follow-through and overlapping animation. So the difference here is the secondary animation, again, this is for character animation. So the main animation would be me walking, you know, and then secondary animation would be little things like, you know, my subtleties of my expression changing, the way I'm moving my hands and things like that. Follow-through and overlapping action are more directly related to the main animation and making it more convincing. So, for example, oh, I don't know if I have it here. No, I don't have it on this computer. But I showed you, oh, actually I've got it. I know where it is. Let me open that up. So if we just look here again. So the main animation here is this ball falling, and then the rest of its stuff is secondary or overlapping animation. So they're all doing the same animation, but the timing is such that they overlap each other. And we'll set this up ourselves in a minute. And another one would be the deform ball here. So if we look at this thing, so this is this thing that's going to rush towards us. And so it's rushing towards us, and when it stops, its main body stops, but then there's follow through with the loose part of its body. It's a sort of a jelly type bag, but if it had microvilli on its surface or something, they would whip forward after the main body stops. And it gives a feeling of real physicality to the animation and to the thing that you're trying to portray. Because remember, these are just dots on a screen, so you've got to sell the idea that these are real. And if we look at the tentacle here we've got overlapping action. So we're going to do this in our exercise. But so you can see they're all rotating around the same axis, but they're offset slightly from each other to make a more naturalistic looking type of animation. So if I get rid of the animation on these, I'm just going to open up the graph editor. Oh, actually, I should just open it up this way. So a joint system is just a hierarchical representation of, or it's a representation of a hierarchy. So if we look at this in the outliner, so it's just the joint 6 here is the base joint, joint 7 is the next one up, joint 8, and then joint 9 is the little tip here. And so if I'm just going to go in and delete the animation on each one of these. So you can see it's a simple animation, just this kind of back and forth. To turn up my screen brightness a little bit. Oops. Okay. So I'm just going to zero out the animation on these things. So rotate Y back to 0. Oops. Okay, so we're back to normal, and we want to animate this thing rotating around on this axis here. So we're going like this. So let's do some simple keyframing here. I'll go back to 1, and I'll keyframe it here at 45 degrees. And then if I go to frame 15, I'm going to keyframe that at 0. And then at frame 30, I'll keyframe that at negative 45. Okay. Oh no, sorry, I want to go back up to 45. Oh no, I don't. What do I want? Oh yeah, I do want negative 45. Okay, I'll just go from 45 to negative 45 and then all the way back up to 45 and just cycle it that way. Get rid of the 0. Okay. So a simple animation, I'm going to loop it infinitely. So now it's pretty rigid because the other joints aren't breaking. So I'm going to grab these keys, just copy them, and go to the next joint, joint 7. I'm going to paste them. Oops, I'm going to go back to 0 first. And paste them. So let's see the animation now. So they're both doing the same thing, but they're doing the same animation at exactly the same time. So I'll do the same thing for the next joint up the hierarchy. I'm just going to paste that. So we're getting the joints breaking, but they're all breaking at exactly the same time. So if we want to have overlapping action that they recommend in Disney, we want to have them break separately. So if we select all of the joints here, you can see that the curves are laid over top of each other. So I'm going to deselect joint 6, the base one, and then select the keys in the other two curves, and just move them over 2 frames. 1, 2. Then deselect, oops. Then just grab the top level one and move it over 2 extra frames. 1, 2. So now if I select this and look at all the joints, you can see there's an offset there now. The joint curves are offset from each other. So now when we play the animation, it starts to become more fluid because the end joint's lagging behind a little bit. We can emphasize this a little bit more by taking these two and offsetting them again. Oh, these ones we have to make go infinity too. And then we can offset just the top level one even more. A couple more frames. And you start getting that more natural motion. Like they call it seaweed. There's a seaweed animation you can do as practice for something like this. Now we can also change the character of each joint a little bit. If we look at them all again, they're offset from each other, but maybe we want the top level one to rotate more. So we can take these curves, go to scale, from the 0 line shift up, and then take the last one, grab it, and scale it up even more. So now it's going through the floor, so we're over exaggerating a bit, but we can see. But you can see how they're breaking slightly, like 4 frames after the other one, and you get a more natural sort of motion. So that's what we mean by overlapping action. But overlapping action is also that feeling of Bugs Bunny is running and he stops, but his ears keep going a little bit, they fly forward. It gives that feeling of motion. So in the exercise that you do today, I want to see, I'm not showing you what it is yet, but I want to see anticipation, and I want to see this overlapping action going on, and then follow through. So when you're going to have this little thing that picks up something and throws it, I want to see some follow through on it afterwards. Okay, so those are the main ones. The things I want you to keep in mind, not so much secondary animation, although that can be important for character animation. Follow through and overlapping action, that kind of natural motion that you can get by overlapping motion like that. We're going to be doing pose to pose. In your final animations, I want to see clear silhouetting of your objects, good layout on stage or on screen. And anticipation is crucially important. So we're going to introduce all of those things into our animation. Squash and stretch is sometimes important, but it gives a much more cartoony sort of look. But I want you to think about the material of the thing that you're making and try and work it into the animations. So now I'm just going to demonstrate what I want you to do for this afternoon. So don't follow along with this part. I'd like you to just watch and then execute it yourself afterwards. So let me just open the proper scene. So I think I've got an old one. So you're going to have a shot like this. And what's going to happen is that this thing is going to bend back, pick up the ball, throw it at the target. The target's going to react to being struck, and the ball is going to come down and bounce. Simple. So let's see. So they're super exaggerated, cartoony. So let's look at it step by step. If you look at my thing there, whatever, the villus I call it. So its main action is to go back and pick up that bright red ball, right? So to alert the audience to look here, there's some anticipation. So it bends forward slightly. It also serves to emphasize the main action. So it bends forward, reaches back, grabs it. So here's the overlapping action that we were just doing. So it's not an arm that's just throwing like this. It's an arm that's going like this and then making a whip motion by breaking the joints separately. So you get this kind of whip motion where the end level joints are the last ones to finish. And then there's some follow through where it kind of returns to its original shape. And then if we look at the trajectory of the ball, we didn't really talk about arcs and straight lines, but this shouldn't be animated in a straight line. It should arc slightly depending on how fast it's going. And so you can see that the target reacts, and then the ball goes down, bounce, bounce. Oh, I got lazy at the end, I guess. We can do a couple more bounces like that. Okay, so you're all going to do something like that. There are a couple of little techniques that I have to show you. So I'm going to go through the steps of doing this. I'm not going to totally complete it, but just to show you how to work in Maya to make this happen. Any questions so far? No? Good. So you're going to start with the file that looks like this. When you're working with joints and you're in your shaded mode, remember 4 is wireframe, 5 is shaded, 6 is textured, and 7 is lit. So we can just work in 5 mode here. But if you want to see your joints through the geometry so they're easy to select, under shading in that panel, you can go to X-ray joints, and that will show you shaded geometry, but the joints will show up as if they were it was transparent. Okay, so most of this stuff is pretty easy. It's just setting keyframes, but then adjusting things in the graph editor. So we're going to do that. And if you just look at the ball here, or sorry, the target, you can see that I've got it grouped with itself. And the reason for that is the upper level group has its pivot at the bottom. That's why it's called target bot pivot. So when the ball strikes it, you can make it rotate as if it was standing on the ground. There's like an invisible stand underneath it. And I think the reason I had separated, I think I did another animation with this originally, but this is just another example where you separate out the pivots with groups so you can control different aspects separately. So the thing that we haven't talked about yet is how you animate with constraints. And this gets a little bit tricky. It's not hard at all, but it's just a little fiddly. So the first thing we're going to do is put just block in our animation. So this thing is going to start here, and it only has to animate in one direction. It's the rotate Z. So I just rotate it a little bit. I can see over here it says rotate Z. So that's the only thing I'm going to bother animating. So it's going to have a keyframe here. So it's going to start. Selected. And then I'm going to give it a little bit of anticipation, maybe, half a second or something, where it's going to bend forward, and then another half second to bend back. Oops. Come on. There we go. And then it's going to pause, right? Well, it picks up the ball, so maybe give it 5 seconds or so of pause. And then it's going to whip forward. So in a quick action, it's going to go yoink. And then it's going to bob up and down. Doink. Doink. Sound effects are important. I'd like to hear you saying yoink and doink a lot. Okay, so obviously it's not reaching the ball when it does this. We're not worried about that yet because we're going to copy and paste. But that's pretty good, the timing. If I look forward, back, throw, good. So now let's look in the graph editor. So we get this kind of recognizable curve. So this is where it starts, anticipation going backwards, rotating towards the ball, pausing for a second, quick throw, and then recovery. So let's look at the interpolation. So the anticipation is good. You don't want it to be jerky, so it's good to have the flat tangent here. That means ease out. So it's going to ease slowly, go into that. It's going to, this is where it reaches its anticipation. So it's going forward, and it's going to ease into that. It's going to go backwards, reach towards the ball, ease into that. So that's good too. The pause is fine. So that's the pause. But then we want it to snap out. So we might want to break this tangent, break this tangent, and make this a little snappier. So instead of, so it reaches back, grabs it, it pauses, and instead of slowly going faster, we want it to whip quickly. So we can break this tangent and get rid of some of that ease out. And then it's going to ease in because it's going to carry on past where it throws, and then it's going to bob up. We might want to break this tangent too to make the release a little snappier, but for now we can just leave it. So there are 4 other joints in here, so if I hold down Shift and click on the plus sign here, it's going to open up all the joints. And I'm just going to select this animation, copy it, and then paste it into each of these joints. But not the last one, because the last one is just the little ball on top here. So joint 5 you don't have to animate. So you can see that we're getting better bend now because they're all bending. It's not quite reaching, but we'll fix that later. But we want to get our overlapping action. Okay, so we can select all the downstream ones. Oh, Windows. God damn it. So we're just ignoring the base one now. We just selected joint 2, 3, 4. And if we select all of the keyframes and offset them by, let's say, 2 frames, by moving it over, 1, 2, then deselect joint 2, which is the second from the base. Select these ones, offset them, 1, 2. Deselect the second to last and grab just the last one. Offset it, 1, 2. So to offset, I'm in move mode, I'm holding down Shift, and I'm using the middle mouse button. So now we've got our overlapping action. It's still exactly the same action for each one, but it'll be nicer animation already, I would imagine. So yeah, you can, ooh, it just gave up at the end. So you can see there's slightly better animation because the tip trails behind a little bit in this backwards motion here. So anticipation, and you can see you start to get this S curve. And when you're doing your animations with breaking joints, in the middle you want to get S shapes as much as possible. You don't have to over exaggerate it, but you want to start to see these. That means that this joint is rotating first, and this one hasn't started that rotation yet, so it's lagging behind. And you get the kind of whip action that makes it look natural. So it doesn't quite get down to the floor here, so let's just get it closer to the ball. And we can do that just by tweaking some of these curves here. So I could grab the base level joint, grab these two keyframes and move them up a little bit so it gets a little closer. And then we can grab the end one, so joint 4, tweak it so it's a little closer. Maybe grab the base one again. So it just takes a little tweaking to get it into the right position. So something like that. Let's look at the animation again, make sure we didn't mess it up. So I like the throw. The follow through is kind of sad. It just collapses. So let's fix that. So I want you to get the idea that you block in animation and then fix it as you go along. So let's just move over to this point here. So we don't want it to go down quite so far, so we can grab these points and maybe move them up a little bit. And then these end bits, just move these up so we get sort of a gradation of action here. Still a little sad. Maybe the base one just goes down too far. Yeah, it kind of goes a little too far, so we can bring this up a little bit. Maybe we wanted to go back to its original position, like it's proud of what it just did. So maybe we'll set keyframes on the different joints to go back to 0. I don't know how this will look, but maybe let it keep a little jaunty tip of its head there. So now if we go back and play, oh, that's kind of terrible. It jumps back. Maybe we want just to let it kind of go back to its original position a little more slowly. So we can grab these keyframes. And it stands up at the end. Okay, whatever. It's good enough. So let's move on to where it has to pick up this ball and throw it. So this is a very useful thing to learn, because if you think about like a character animation, if I'm a character that's being animated and I walk over and I pick up this mouse and I walk back with it, I don't want to have to animate this mouse separately so it follows my hand. I want to constrain it to my hand somehow in a way that it's not constrained here. When my hand touches it, it's constrained. And then when I move, it follows my hand no matter what the animation is doing. Then I can release the constraint. So that's what we have to do with the ball here. I haven't done this for a long time, so I might forget. Give it a shot. So right now the ball has no constraints on it, no keyframes or anything like that. And so we're just going to advance in the animation to this point just before we want the thing to pick it up, before it's going to go and throw it. So for me it's around frame 32. And I'm going to set a key on all the translation attributes of the ball itself. Okay. And then we want it to follow the end joint. We're going to use this little end joint here for the ball to stick to. And so this introduces a new concept that you probably didn't do last term at all, but using constraints. So in the animation menu, there's a constrain menu set here, and I'm just going to tear it off so we can see it. And there are different types of constraints, and the constraint just means it's a relationship between objects that you can turn on and off. And an object can be constrained to more than one object, and will average its position or rotation between them. So a parent constraint is going to control the, one object will control the position and rotation of an object. Point will just be position, orientation is just rotation, and then there are all these other ones, but let's not worry about them too much. We're going to do a point constraint. So we want to constrain between this top level joint. So you select the constrainer first, the thing that's going to do the constraining, and then shift select the thing to be constrained. And then I'm going to go to, not orient, to point, and just make sure my default settings are set here. So what I want you to look at right now, up here, you can see the ball is selected and we can still see its keyframes because we put a single keyframe on it to lock it to the ground. But as soon as I add this constraint, they turn to green. Okay? What that means is that this ball has two inputs. One is keyframes that are telling it where to go, and then it's got constraints, which are also telling it where to go. And you have to tell it, which one to pay attention to at any one time. So you can see here, I should stop pointing, there's a blend parent and a blend point constraint. And this is an on and off switch for whether it's listening to constraints or to keyframes. So can you see that, the blend point here? Right now it's set to 1. That means it's saying, ball, listen to what the constraints are telling you. So if we look at the animation now, it's going to follow, it's going to stay stuck to the tip of the thingy here. If I turn blend point to 0, it's going to pop back to its last known keyframe. Okay? In this case, its only keyframe. So we want to animate that blend point value. So the ball should be sitting on the ground, good. Thing goes forward, reaches back, and at this point we want to set a keyframe on blend point. So it's still keyframes. So this is where it gets confusing. I'm setting keyframes on the keyframing thing. So I've keyframed blend point at 0, which means the ball should listen to its keyframes. Then 1 frame later, I'm going to switch this to 1. And you'll see the ball pops over a little bit. That means now I've set a keyframe so it pays attention to the constraints. So then we get an animation like this. It's sitting there, leans forward, it grabs it, and then it's holding it. Now we want it to let go, right? But if I just turn off that blend point at this stage, when it's over here, it's just going to pop right back here. So before we set a keyframe on blend point, we have to set a new keyframe on the position of the ball. So that's translate X, Y, and Z. I'm just going to select only the ball. Key that. Now it's not going to make a difference because it's still listening to the constraints at this point. But then we want to do a 1 frame switch. So again, we want to set a key on blend point at 1. 1 means constraints. And then the very next frame, we want to release it. So set it to 0, and we'll get this. So now if we play the animation, we get it to grab it and release it. Now we haven't animated the ball moving yet, but that's fine. We have the pickup working. So now we can just quickly animate the ball. So at this frame, it's here, and then maybe 3 frames later, because we want it to travel with some speed. I'm going to take that ball. I'm going to have it knock into the target, almost a bullseye. Okay, so let's see. So, just like that, we have a nice little animation. Oh, I remember why this was on a pivot before. I used to have it so this was a Velcro thing. So the ball was also a child of the pivot point here. So when it stuck, it hit this thing, and then we tipped the target back, the ball would stay stuck to its surface. But you don't have to do that. So let me just finish up the ball animation. So it goes boink. Then I want it to bounce off. I'm going to go in this side view. See this? You guys okay? It's so quiet. I'm going to turn on my grid so I can see where the floor is. So I have it go down here. Another little animation. And then we can take a look at things. So it goes down to the floor too quickly. So I'm just going to hold down Shift, left mouse drag over these and grab these keyframes and drag them out a bit. So it takes a little longer to get down to the floor. Okay, that's terrible. So we want it. I'm going to put an extra keyframe in here so we get more of an arc. That's better. And it could die off more quickly, but I don't want to spend my life doing that. So, and then the last thing, again, the bowling ball made the big cube jump, right? If we want to emphasize the force of this throw, we make the target bend back. So right when it gets struck, we're going to put we're going to put a keyframe on the top level hierarchy, the target bot pivot, and it's going to rotate around a Z axis, I think. Yeah. So I'll set a keyframe on Z, and then just a couple of frames, make it go back, and then you can even pause there briefly, and then go back to 0. And you could have it wobble a little bit, but again, I'll let you guys do that. So the timing's not great, it's too slow. It should be like, psh, then boom, you know, so I have to change, has to have a snappier go back, and then instead of toppling it over, it just slowly goes back into position. So you think you can do that? Yeah, you can do that. Okay, so here's the challenging part to make it fun for me. All right. Let's think of some words. What are some adverbs or personality? Let's have personality descriptions. Okay. Sprightly. Sprightly. Okay, you're sprightly. Sprightly. Zunder? Sprightly Zunder. Okay. Caitlin? Yeah. You're paranoid. You're timid. E, right? H or L? H. April, you're brave. Any other ones you think of? Sam? What? No. That's the other. That's what she should do for her animation. Okay, Sam, you're going to be confident, which is kind of the same as brave. Okay, you're also going to be sprightly. E-W. Who's left? Brittany. What's Brittany? Lazy. BH. Okay? Oh, Wendy. Wendy. Okay. It's its final effort. It dies. Okay? Wait, I can't give Emily, she's the only one doubling up. Okay, so, okay, I know, robotic. Okay, so that's all I want to do today. You've got an hour and a half just to play around with this. Finish it as soon as you want. You don't have to hand it in. I just want to see everybody working, and I can help you with those different things. So just to remind you, because this is what people always forget, before you get it to pick up the ball, set a keyframe on the ball's position. And then when you do the constraint, it will give you that pair blend option. It won't appear unless it's got keyframes and constraints on it. Okay? And I would recommend, I'm kind of giving you advanced level stuff of character qualities to do. So just block in a rough animation first and then tweak it to do the things that you want. Like, what is somebody timid going to be like? What's somebody brave going to be like? Okay? I'm going to stop my recording and then I'll try and upload this in case you want to review it.